Rain soaked through her threadbare coat, washing away the last shred of her dignity. She had just been fired for saving a life. Suddenly, blinding headlights pierced the darkness. 5 blacked-out supercars boxed her in on the empty street. A man stepped out, his voice a low growl. "Where is the fat nurse?" The emergency room at Chicago General was a chaotic symphony of human misery. But to Penelope Gallagher, it was home. At 32, Penelope, or Penny, to the few people who bothered to look past her physical appearance, was the backbone of the night shift. She was a heavy-set woman carrying the weight of stress-long night shifts and a genetics lottery that favored curves and softness over the sharp angles society prized. Her scrubs were a size XXL, and she was used to the side-eyes from the sleek young nursing grads and the condescending smirks from the attending physicians. But what she lacked in a conventional waistline, she made up for with a brilliant clinical mind and hands that rarely trembled. It was 3:14 a.m. on a brutal Tuesday in November when the double doors of the trauma bay crashed open. There were no paramedics, no warning from dispatch, just 2 men in drenched, expensive overcoats dragging a third between them. The man in the middle was young, maybe 22, with dark, curling hair matted with blood and sweat. His custom-tailored white shirt was soaked in a horrifying amount of crimson, bubbling from a gunshot wound high on his right chest. "Help him!" One of the men roared, his accent thick and sharp, undeniably East Coast Italian. "Do something, damn it!" Dr. Richard Allman, the night attending, took one look at the men, the visible bulges under their jackets, and the bullet wound. He paled and took a step back. "Security." Dr. Allman stammered to the triage desk. "Get security. This is gang-related. We need to clear them out before we process—" "He can't breathe!" Penny shouted, pushing past Dr. Allman. She took one look at the young man's cyanotic lips and the severe distension of the veins in his neck. His trachea was deviating to the left. He was suffocating his right lung, collapsing and trapping air in his chest cavity. A tension pneumothorax. If he didn't get relief in the next 60 seconds, his heart would stop from the pressure. "Penelope, stand down." "Doctor," Almond snapped. "Protocol dictates we wait for police clearance on undispatched gunshot victims. They could be armed, they could be cartel. He's a 20-year-old kid and he's dying right now. Richard Penny didn't look at the 2 terrifying men who had brought him in." She only looked at the patient. She grabbed a 14-gauge needle from the crash cart, her thick fingers moving with practiced lightning-fast precision. "You touch him, you're fired," Dr. Allman warned, his voice cracking. "I am the attending." Penny ignored him. She found the second intercostal space in the mid-clavicular line on the young man's right side. She didn't hesitate. She drove the needle deep into his chest. A loud, distinct hiss of escaping air filled the tense silence of the trauma bay. Instantly, the young man gasped, his eyes flying open as oxygen rushed back into his remaining functional lung. The horrific blue tinge to his lips began to fade. "Get him on oxygen. Start 2 large-bore IVs and page surgery." Penny barked at a stunned junior nurse who finally snapped to attention. The 2 men who had brought the boy in stared at Penny. One of them, a man with a jagged scar across his jaw, pointed a trembling, blood-soaked finger at her. "You saved him. What is your name?" "Nurse Gallagher," she said breathlessly, wiping sweat from her forehead. Before another word could be spoken, hospital security swarmed the bay, followed closely by the Chicago PD. The 2 men melted into the shadows of the ER waiting room, disappearing into the storm outside before the officers could even draw their notepads. By 4 a.m., the young man was stabilized in the ICU. By 4:15 a.m., Penny was called into the office of the Chief Hospital Administrator, Victoria Hastings. Victoria was a woman made entirely of sharp edges, designer suits, and corporate malice. She sat behind her mahogany desk, Dr. Alman standing smugly at her side. "Nurse Gallagher," Victoria began, not offering Penny a seat. "You blatantly violated hospital protocol. You bypassed a direct order from an attending physician, and you engaged with dangerous individuals who brought an unregistered violent crime victim into our facility. I saved a life." Penny said, her voice shaking but her stance firm. Her feet ached inside her sensible nursing clogs. If I had waited for protocol, that boy would be dead. His heart was mere seconds from stopping due to mediastinal shift. "We are not a rogue clinic, Penelope," Victoria said coldly, her eyes dropping to Penny's waistline with a familiar, silent judgment. "We are a prestigious medical institution. We have an image to maintain. Frankly, you have never quite fit that image, but we tolerated you because of staffing shortages. Today you became a liability." "You're firing me," Penny whispered, the reality crashing down on her. "I've been here for 7 years. I've covered every missed shift, every holiday. And you will be compensated for your accumulated PTO," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "Clear out your locker. Security will escort you off the premises." The humiliation was worse than the firing. Being watched by a smirking security guard as she packed her stethoscopes, her favorite coffee mug, and a half-eaten box of granola bars into a cardboard box. The whispers from the younger nurses as she walked down the hall. To make matters worse, when she reached the employee parking garage, her battered 2008 Honda Civic refused to turn over. The alternator had finally died. Defeated, exhausted, and fighting back hot tears, Penny pulled her thin rain slicker tighter around her shoulders. She couldn't afford a cab, not now. She lived 2 miles away near Little Italy. She had no choice but to walk. The Chicago rain was merciless, driven by a biting November wind that cut right through Penny's flimsy jacket. The streets were pitch black and virtually abandoned at 5 a.m. Water pooled in deep potholes, soaking through her shoes. With every step, the cardboard box in her arms grew heavier, the bottom growing soggy and threatening to give way. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. Her mind raced with terrifying arithmetic. Rent was due in 3 days. Her savings were non-existent because she had just paid for her mother's expensive diabetes medication out of pocket. She was 32, overweight, exhausted, and now unemployed with a permanent black mark on her medical license for insubordination. "Just keep walking," she muttered to herself, her breath pluming in the freezing air as she turned onto an empty stretch of South Racine Avenue. Just put one foot in front of the other. She didn't hear them at first over the sound of the torrential rain. Then the low, guttural vibration of high-performance engines rattled the pavement beneath her feet. Penny looked over her shoulder. Headlights, blinding and perfectly aligned, cut through the darkness. It wasn't just one car, it was a convoy. A matte black Lamborghini Urus led the pack, flanked by 2 menacing Mercedes AMG G63S. Trailing them was a sleek Ferrari Roma and an Audi RS Q8. 5 multi-million-dollar supercars crawling down the dilapidated streets of Chicago like apex predators on a hunt. Panic flared in Penny's chest. This was exactly the kind of cartel or gang activity Dr. Allman had warned about. She ducked her head, hugging her soggy box tighter, and picked up her pace, moving closer to the brick wall of an abandoned warehouse. The engines roared louder. The Lamborghini suddenly accelerated, swerving in front of her and cutting off the sidewalk. Penny gasped, stumbling backward. Before she could turn and run, the 2 G-wagons pulled up alongside her, boxing her in against the brick wall. The Ferrari and Audi blocked off the street entirely. She was trapped. The heavy doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 8 men stepped out into the pouring rain. They weren't street thugs. They wore bespoke Italian suits, dark ties and trench coats. Despite the darkness, Penny could clearly see the distinct, terrifying bulges of shoulder holsters beneath their coats. The driver's door of the Lamborghini swung open. A man stepped out. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to block out the streetlights behind him. He possessed an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. His dark hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp and covered in a faint shadow of scruff. His eyes, even in the dim light, were a piercing, dangerous steel grey. He looked like a man who commanded empires and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. This was Lorenzo Rossi, the head of the Rossi Syndicate, the most powerful and ruthless organization in the Midwest. Lorenzo took a slow step toward her. The rain seemed to bounce off his expensive wool coat. His men stood perfectly still, a silent, deadly perimeter. Penny backed up until her shoulders hit the cold, wet brick of the warehouse. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "This is it," she thought wildly. "They're here to tie up loose ends. I saved a rival gang member, and now they're going to kill me." Lorenzo stopped 3 feet away from her. His cold eyes scanned her up and down, taking in her soaked hair, her shivering, heavy-set frame, the pathetic cardboard box clutched to her chest. His jaw tightened. He turned his head slightly toward the man with the scarred jaw, the same man from the emergency room. "Is this her?" Lorenzo's voice was a low rumble that easily overpowered the sound of the storm. The scarred man nodded deferentially. "Yes, boss." She wasn't at the desk, so we couldn't get her full name from the board, but Dante told us what he saw before he passed out. Lorenzo turned his terrifying gaze back to Penny. He took 1 step closer. "Where's the fat nurse?" he demanded, his tone aggressive, demanding. Penny blinked, the sheer audacity of the insult cutting through her mortal terror. A spark of exhausted, furious indignation flared to life in her chest. She had spent her entire life being belittled, ignored, and fired just an hour ago for doing the right thing. She was done cowering. "I'm right here." Penny snapped, her voice trembling, but surprisingly loud. "I'm the nurse, and I have a name. It's Penelope." The armed men around them tensed hands, drifting toward their jackets at her insolent tone. But Lorenzo raised a single gloved hand. Everyone froze. Lorenzo stared at her, his eyes searching her face. The hostility slowly drained from his posture, replaced by something entirely different. Something that looked shockingly like reverence. "Penelope," he repeated, tasting the name on his tongue. He looked down at the soggy box in her arms. "Dante is my little brother. The doctors at the hospital. They told me what happened. They told me the attending physician ordered him left to die. They told me a nurse broke protocol, shoved a needle into his chest, and gave him a back to me." Penny swallowed hard, her anger faltering under his intense stare. "I was just doing my job." "No," Lorenzo said softly, stepping so close she could smell the rich scent of rain leather and Tom Ford cologne. "You did what no one else had the courage to do. You saved Rossi blood." He gestured to the box she was holding. A stethoscope was dangling out of the side, dragging on the wet pavement. "Why are you out here in the rain, Penelope?" Lorenzo asked, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Why are your things in a box? Where is your car?" "My car died," she muttered, looking down, suddenly deeply conscious of her ruined clothes and her size compared to this magnificent, terrifying man. "And I don't work there anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. "You don't work there anymore?" Lorenzo repeated, his voice, dropping an octave, turning lethal. "Did they fire you?" Penny nodded slowly. "The administrator, Victoria Hastings. She said I violated protocol and ruined the hospital's image by treating people like you." Lorenzo didn't yell. He didn't explode. but the sheer, localized violence radiating from him made Penny want to step back into the brick wall. He looked at his men. "Marco," Lorenzo said quietly to the scarred man. "Yes, boss. By Chicago General Hospital." Lorenzo ordered casually, as if asking for a cup of coffee. "Fire the board. Fire the attending physician, and drag this Victoria Hastings into the street." Penny's jaw dropped. "Wait, you can't. I can do whatever I want," Lorenzo said, turning back to her, his harsh features softening only for her. He reached out his large, warm hand, gently taking the soggy, heavy box from her aching arms. He handed it to one of his armed guards without looking. "You're shivering," Lorenzo noted. He unbuttoned his custom wool overcoat, and before Penny could protest, draped it around her shoulders. The coat was massive, swallowing her frame, radiating his body heat. "My brother is alive because of you, Penelope," Lorenzo said, looking directly into her eyes, seeing past the weight, past the soaked scrubs, straight to the core of her. "That means my life, and everything I own, belongs to you. You will never walk in the rain again. You will never worry about a bill again." He gestured toward the open door of the Lamborghini. "Get in," the Mafia boss commanded softly. "We're taking you home." The interior of the Lamborghini Urus smelled of rich, unadulterated wealth, a heady mix of bespoke Italian leather and the faint, spicy undertone of Lorenzo's cologne. Penny sat frozen in the passenger seat, drowning in the massive wool coat he had draped over her. The rain pounded against the tinted glass, but inside the cabin it was terrifyingly quiet. Behind them, the convoy of G-wagons and the Ferrari fell into perfect formation, escorting them through the slick, empty streets of Chicago. "Taylor Street," Penny whispered, her voice barely audible over the purr of the engine. "Near the old bakery. It's a brick walk-up." Lorenzo didn't look at the GPS. He simply nodded his large, scarred hands, maneuvering the steering wheel with casual, terrifying grace. "My brother Dante. He is 22. He was supposed to be touring real estate properties tonight. Instead, a rival syndicate ambushed him. 3 of my men died protecting him." Penny swallowed hard, staring at the side of Lorenzo's sharp profile. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "The men who did it are already dead. Marco handled it while I drove to the hospital." Penny shivered, though the car was warm. She was sitting next to a man who ordered executions as easily as she ordered a coffee. Yet when Lorenzo pulled the SUV up to the curb of her dilapidated apartment building in Little Italy, he didn't look at her crumbling stoop with disgust. He looked at it with quiet calculation. "You live here," he stated, cutting the engine. "I know it's not a Gold Coast penthouse," Penny said defensively, her insecurities flaring up. She pulled the coat tighter around her plump frame. "But it's what a nurse's salary affords when she has to pay $5,000 a month out of pocket for her mother's insulin and dialysis." Lorenzo turned his head slowly. His piercing grey eyes locked onto hers, and for a second, the dangerous Mafia Don vanished, replaced by a man deeply moved. "Your mother is sick." "Evelyn," Penny said, looking down at her hands. "She's all I have. I was working double shifts to keep her treatments going. Without my job, without my license." Her voice cracked, the terrifying reality of her situation finally breaking through her adrenaline. Before she could stop them, hot tears spilled over her cheeks. She was 32, overweight, exhausted, and completely broken. Lorenzo moved so fast she flinched, but his touch was remarkably gentle. He reached across the console, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. His hand lingered, his fingers tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "Look at me, Penelope," he commanded softly. She forced her eyes up to meet his. Society tells women that to be valued, they must be thin, compliant, and invisible. Lorenzo said, his voice vibrating with a dark, simmering intensity. I do not care about society. I look at you, and I see a woman with hands steady enough to cheat death. I see a woman soft enough to comfort the dying and fierce enough to tell a mafia boss she has a name. You are magnificent. Penny's breath hitched. No man, let alone a man who looked like he had stepped off the cover of GQ, had ever spoken to her like that. He wasn't looking past her size. He was looking directly at it, and he was captivated. A sharp knock on the driver's side window broke the spell. It was Marco. Lorenzo rolled the window down a fraction. Speak. Boss, Marco said, water dripping from his scarred chin. The hospital buyout is in motion. We set up the shell company, Vanguard Health Holdings. We've aggressively purchased the majority shares from the board. As of 8 a.m. tomorrow, you own Chicago General. And the administrator? Lorenzo asked, his eyes never leaving Penny's face. Victoria Hastings is currently asleep in her condo on Lakeshore Drive. She has no idea. Good, Lorenzo said. He rolled the window up and turned completely to Penny. Go upstairs. Pack a bag for you, and a bag for your mother, Evelyn. You are no longer living in this building. Mr. Rossi, I can't. Lorenzo, he corrected smoothly. And you can. I am moving you and your mother into my private estate in Highland Park. My personal medical staff will take over her dialysis. You will never pay for another vial of insulin as long as you live. Why are you doing this? Penny asked, her voice trembling. I just saved a patient. It's what I took an oath to do. And I took an oath to protect my family, Lorenzo replied, leaning in until his lips were inches from hers. You are the reason my brother is breathing. That makes you family now. And Rossi men take care of their own. 2 days later, the boardroom of Chicago General Hospital was a suffocating chamber of panic. Victoria Hastings, impeccably dressed as always, in a stark white Chanel suit, paced nervously at the head of the long mahogany table. Dr. Richard Allman sat nearby, wiping sweat from his forehead. The sudden hostile takeover by Vanguard Health Holdings had blindsided the entire executive board. They had been summoned for an emergency meeting with the new majority shareholder, and no one knew who it was. We just need to explain our margins, Victoria said, her voice tight. We tell them about our cost-cutting measures, the recent staff terminations to balance the budget. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Silence fell over the room like a guillotine. 4 men in tailored black suits walked in, first fanning out to secure the corners of the room. Marco, his scarred face stoic, stood by the door. Then Lorenzo Rossi entered. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that screamed lethal elegance. But it wasn't the notorious crime boss that made Victoria Hastings gasp and drop her pen. It was the woman holding his arm. Penelope Gallagher walked into the boardroom, completely transformed. She wasn't wearing shapeless, fluid-stained scrubs. She was wearing a custom-tailored, deep emerald green wrap dress that hugged her heavy curves in all the right places, accentuating her full bust and cinching at her waist. Her hair was styled in soft, cascading waves, and her makeup was flawless. She looked powerful, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. Penelope. Dr. Allman choked out his face, turning the color of ash. What is the meaning of this? Lorenzo pulled out a leather chair at the head of the table. He didn't sit in it. He guided Penny into it, standing behind her, like a dark, immovable guardian. Good morning, Victoria. Richard. Penny said, her voice steady and smooth. She folded her hands on the polished wood. I believe we have some hospital business to discuss. Victoria's perfectly manicured hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. She looked from Penny to Lorenzo, finally recognizing the terrifying man from the emergency room, whispers, You can't be Vanguard Health Holdings. You're a mobster." "I am an investor," Lorenzo corrected coldly. "And as of 48 hours ago, I own 82% of this hospital's voting shares, which means I own this building, I own the equipment, and I own your contracts." He leaned forward, placing his large hands on the back of Penny's chair. 2 days ago, you fired the finest medical professional in this facility. Lorenzo continued, his voice echoing in the silent room. You prioritized your pathetic public image over a human life. You insulted her. You stripped her of her dignity. She broke protocol, Dr. Allman shouted defensively. She operated outside her scope. Lorenzo didn't even look at the doctor. He snapped his fingers. Marco stepped forward, tossing a thick manila folder onto the table. It slid to a stop right in front of Victoria. "My associates did a little digging into your prestigious image," Lorenzo said smoothly. "That folder contains bank records tracing $2.4 million diverted from the Pediatric Oncology Fund into a private offshore account under your maiden name, Victoria. And Dr. Almanit details the kickbacks you've been receiving from pharmaceutical reps to push addictive opioids through the ER." Victoria's face drained of all blood. She collapsed into her chair, realizing she was entirely destroyed. "You're going to kill us," Dr. Allman whimpered, trembling violently. "I am a businessman, Richard, not a monster," Lorenzo sneered. "I don't need to kill you." Right on cue, the boardroom doors opened again. 2 Chicago police detectives walked in, looking incredibly uncomfortable but determined. Lorenzo had handed them the financial evidence on a silver platter. It was a career-making bust they couldn't ignore, even if it came from the Rossi Syndicate. Victoria Hastings and Dr. Richard Allman, the lead detective, said, pulling out his handcuffs, "You're under arrest for embezzlement fraud and medical malpractice." Penny sat silently as she watched the 2 people who had made her life a living hell be read their rights and escorted out of the room in handcuffs. The sheer overwhelming satisfaction of the moment left her breathless. When the doors closed, leaving only Penny Lorenzo and his men in the room, Lorenzo looked down at her. "The hospital needs a new chief administrator," Lorenzo said softly. "Someone who actually cares about the patients. Someone who knows what it's like to work the floor. I was thinking of appointing a woman named Penelope Gallagher." Penny looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Lorenzo, I'm just a nurse. I don't know how to run a hospital." "You know how to save lives," Lorenzo corrected, coming around the side of the chair and kneeling beside her, uncaring of his expensive suit. He took her hands in his. "I will hire the accountants. I will hire the lawyers. You will run the medicine. You will build the hospital you always wanted to work in." "This is madness," she whispered, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "Why are you doing all of this for me? Look at me. I'm not a mafia queen. I'm just a fat girl from Little Italy." "Stop," Lorenzo ordered, his voice thick with raw emotion. He reached up, cupping her face. "You are exactly what I want. Your curves, your softness, your fire. You are the most beautiful creature I have ever laid eyes on. I don't want a fragile porcelain doll. I want a queen who can hold a man's heart in her hands and keep it beating." He didn't wait for her to argue. Lorenzo pulled her down by the lapels of her dress and crashed his lips against hers. The kiss was consuming, tasting of raw power, dark promises, and an undeniable burning passion. Penny melted into him, her hands tangling in his dark hair, finally letting go of the lifetime of insecurities that had weighed her down. She wasn't just a discarded employee anymore. She was the savior of the Rossi family, the new ruler of Chicago General, and the sole obsession of the city's most dangerous man. As Lorenzo pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, he smiled a rare, devastating expression. "Come mia regina," he murmured, helping her to her feet. "Your mother is waiting for us at the estate, and we have an empire to run." Penny went from a discarded, humiliated nurse to the most powerful woman in Chicago's medical scene, all because she had the courage to do the right thing. Lorenzo proved that real men don't care about a number on a scale. They care about the size of a woman's heart and her unyielding bravery. Do you think Penny made the right choice, embracing her dark mafia king? Let us know in the comments. Like this video, share it with someone who loves a badass revenge story, and subscribe for more thrilling real-life drama.